Are you the least bit surprised that I was gonna make a video like this one? Because I certainly wasn't. Final Fantasy XVI though. Final Fantasy XVI. FF16. It's crazy to even say those words out loud and to even say the phrase that Final Fantasy XVI is finally here. Because the last time we had a Final Fantasy numbered entry, and I have to emphasize numbered entry here, was 2016 and 2017 with Final Fantasy 15 and then Final Fantasy 15 Royal Edition. And so yeah, it's been 6 long years for a numbered entry, and I'm very excited with the end result of what this game presented. But of course the video is the disrespect of Final Fantasy 16, because obviously despite the praises of the game, there are people on the internet being people on the internet and just saying that this game is too edgy, it's not a Final Fantasy game, the combat is way too simplistic, and a bunch of other like comments and opinions that I get it, I understand it, but boy, you look stupid saying it, don't you? Now, of course, for those that are stumbling upon this video here, you're free to roast me. I've always say that whenever I make these videos in terms of like the disrespect of this game is real or the respect of this game is real, because at the end of the day, everybody has their opinions. I'm totally aware of that. There's the disclaimer portion so that people are like, oh, he's being a man-child because they're calling his favorite franchise this, and that. No. I mean, you can say that in the comments, I'll laugh out loud, I have done it in the past, but I mean like, I'm only pointing out the stupidity of the comments and not the fact that they made the comment. They're free to do that by all means. I'm just here to poke fun of it at the end of the day. That's the whole point of this video. Now that we got that small part out of the way, let's go to the actual stuff that I really want to critique and point out with in terms of the disrespect of Final Fantasy 16 here. And the first thing in terms of all this is the too edginess factor and the Game of Thrones comparison. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm all for comparisons as long as the comparison makes sense, and against with Game of Thrones, it does make a little bit sense in terms of like the story plot details and the way they want the player to be engaged with the story and the world that, you know, Final Fantasy 16 is, you know, presenting and things like that. But it can only go so far in terms of what actually Final Fantasy 16 is trying to do, and I would argue it's trying to go back to the roots of the original 6 games, and that's what I would consider to be the better comparison, where if you compare 16 to the original 6 games, and you can do that like lickety split with the, you know, the pixel remaster you can get on the Switch and practically everywhere nowadays. When you compare the original 6 games, and I'll emphasize why these 6 games in a later on in the video, but when you compare it with these to Final Fantasy 16, it's just a better comparison because you can see that there are some character inspirations from those games poured into like the characters that we see in 16. We see like there's certain character dynamics that makes a lot of sense when you compare it to like, you know, 4 or 5. No, I would say 4, 3, and 6 in particular. When you compare like those games to this game, it just makes a lot of sense in terms of that. However, I'm not being petty about that comparison. I'm just saying that if you're going to make that comparison, you also have to use more, you know, examples, or at least be a little bit more specific in terms of like why Game of Thrones or like why Witcher and things like that. But that's like a minor problem in terms of all of this. But it does lean into the factor of, oh, Final Fantasy 16 is too edgy because they use a lot of like Game of Thrones inspiration, blah blah blah, and things like that. To which that point, I'm actually a little bit pissed off about. The too edginess factor is such a stupid point to make when you have to consider the fact that since day one, Final Fantasy was always going to be edgy. Yeah, I can understand that the pixel graphics back then with the SNES and things like that, you wouldn't see that to be something edgy, but you have to consider the fact that Final Fantasy was such a great franchise in Japan that they weren't even sure about the reception it was gonna get on the West because of a lot of the edginess factor and the medieval aspects and the JRPG mechanics, all that kind of stuff. And then of course when you look at like, I don't know, Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, 10 to some degree, the 13 trilogy, 15 is the definition of edginess, my guy. Like, you can't say that 16 is too edgy when time and time again we've already seen that for like 20 or so years already. I mean, again, take a look at Final Fantasy VII because that's where the true edginess factor began. I mean, look at my guy Cloud Strife. I think we already know where this point is going. We also can't forget about gameplay here with Final Fantasy 16 because that's also been one of like its major critiques in regard to like, oh, it's so different from every other Final Fantasy entry. It leans too much to the action components as opposed to the RPG element, and it doesn't really execute things well. All of that are reasonable critiques, but the idea of it not being a Final Fantasy game because it doesn't have the capabilities and whatever it is that makes it a Final Fantasy game, which we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, that's completely stupid, on top of the fact that people have been grabbing a controller and just eating with one hand and just pressing a button 30 times, which, mind you, this is to prove the point that the gameplay is absolute garbage and like, oh, you just have to press the same button 30 times, which that has been disproven. For those that have seen that on Twitter, you know that even Twitter itself fact-checked it and saying, listen, they're using a ton of accessibility features. This is completely out of left field. This isn't even what the game is all about. Because you have to understand also, this is Final Fantasy 15. Based on the footage that I've been seeing and all the combos pulling off, there's no way in hell that it's just one freaking button for you to press. And if for that person to do that and just everybody out there is probably doing the same thing as well, you're just losing out on the creativity and the innovation that makes 16 stand out, not just as a numbered entry to the franchise, but just as a game in general. And the reason why I'm saying all of this is because you also have to consider the fact that the very same people that gave us Devil May Cry 5 gave us a battle system for Final Fantasy 16. So there's a lot that the game expects you as the player to do, and pressing the game 30 times is not one of them, my guy. Like, you're losing out on the creativity and the innovation of pulling the best combos there is, staggering opponents, using magic and the icon abilities as special finishing blow combos, and just the fact that you have so much creative freedom to play the game and you chose to just press the same button 30 times to prove the point that there is bad gameplay design, which again is a very stupid and very petty point to make when, again, for those that have played Devil May Cry 5 or Bayonetta 3 or any other hack and slash game out there, even Scarlet Nexus, these types of games expect so much from the player in terms of executing combos and in terms of understanding the room around you and how you can use said environment to your skills in pulling off the best freaking combos there is. I'm telling you, guaranteed there's a ton of combo videos out there with Final Fantasy 16, and that one makes this game so exceptionally well done from a gameplay and combat perspective. I don't care what anybody has to say about that. And I'm not saying that you can't critique the gameplay system. Absolutely, you're down to critique it and say that there are things that they did right and there are things that they did wrong. A lot of the gameplay components in this game feels like a first-hand experimentation from the people that gave us an MMO game. And a lot of people have made also the argument of Final Fantasy 16 feels like a single-player MMO experience, which is totally fine. That's actually a good critique to make because there are some of those elements that makes it that way. But the combat system and the overall gameplay style of this game is so fun to like experience and be a part of. There's no way that you can call this game bad simply because you don't know how to pull off combos or you never played a hack and slash adventure game in the first place. Like, simply because of those experiences, this is an amazing game. Like, this is something totally worth diving into and actually experimenting and being creative with and learning how to play the freaking game. So yeah, there's also that component as well. But the last thing that I want to discuss, the very last thing that honestly pisses me off a lot, and a lot of Final Fantasy fans within the community has also greatly expressed this point, but I want to make it known on video format because a lot of people really resonate with this particular reason in terms of disrespect of Final Fantasy 16, and that is that Final Fantasy 16 is not a Final Fantasy game. And I don't know why people make that like assumption or make that opinion well known, because it's so blindsided. It's such a blindsided opinion when time and time again that has been proven wrong in so many different ways. Like, from Final Fantasy VII up until this point has been the greatest examples in gaming history in terms of like, this is what we want out of a Final Fantasy game. Like, Final Fantasy VII proved the point of why this is a Final Fantasy game, and people are still dunking on that, and they're dunking on this game because of the combat system, the lack of RPG mechanics, and just the fact that it is a different gameplay style overall, and why it shouldn't even be called a Final Fantasy game in the first place. And that right there is dumb. It just is, because Final Fantasy 16, while drastically different in gameplay style, guess what? It still has a story similar with the crystals and the summons from the Final Fantasy games. It still has, you know, the characterization of characters, like I said, to go back to Clive and Jill and Sid and everybody that you meet throughout the story of this game. It feels like they're representations of the previous games, of like Terra, of Kain, of Cecil, of freaking Cloud, Squall, all those guys. You still see those characterizations into the characters of 16 here. So there's no way in hell that I can even agree with the assumption that 16 is not a Final Fantasy game, when at the end of the day, it hammers home all of the concepts that makes it a Final Fantasy game in the first place. Like, I just don't understand that opinion. I never will, and quite frankly, I'm glad that's been disproven time and time again. But you know what? At the end of the day, I've said what I've said, and you guys have a comment section for it to say your piece as well. You're free to agree, you're free to disagree with me, you're free to roast me. Like I said, when I make these videos, I already know what's coming at me from a mile away, so I already have an understanding how the comment section is gonna be like down below, and things like that. Totally understand it. It's all for you guys. So just throw that what you have to say and things like that. But I feel like I'm in the right to say all of those things and critique it and poke fun of it, because a lot of people have been waiting for this game and they're experiencing it, and of course they're forming their own opinions, and a lot of them are very similar in certain aspects and things like that. But generally speaking, this game is a good game. It is a phenomenally well done game, and it is absolutely a Final Fantasy game, and I'm very glad that's the case through and through. I just have to be the one guy to say, listen here buddy, what you're saying here, I appreciate it, but X, Y, and Z reason. And I hope I've done that. I may have exaggerated a little bit here, but honestly, I've said what I've said, and I think I want to move on from here because I got a lot of stuff that I have to take care of. So yeah, that's it. I think I'm gonna end the video here now. This is all yours. I made my piece. Go have fun with it. Go play Final Fantasy 16 if you haven't. Again, there's the demo if you want to try it out for yourself before actually buying the game. If you're still hesitant on even playing the game in the first place, just try it out for yourselves. I guarantee you it's going to be the time of your life. If not, go watch some streams of people doing it or playing the game and you'll see what I mean. But anyway, peace out on that front. I'm done, alright? I'm done. Do what you gotta do here, alright? See ya. Roll the outro.